The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over Copper Creek as Jake Lightning Carter dragged another bucket of water across the dusty stable yard. At 19, his hands were already calloused from years of caring for horses. His father's old Colt 45, hidden beneath loose hay in the back stall where no one would think to look. The town moved at its usual lazy pace. Merchants sweeping their porches, children chasing tumbleweeds, and Sheriff Bull Harrison already 3 drinks deep at Murphy's saloon, despite it being barely past noon. Jake paused to wipe sweat from his brow, his green eyes scanning the empty main street. Old Tom Bradley emerged from the stable office, his weathered face creased with concern as he limped over on his bad leg. "Boy, you've been mighty restless lately," Tom observed, his voice gravelly from years of desert air. "Something eating at you?" "Just thinking about things, Tom. About how this town just accepts everything that happens to it." Jake's voice carried a frustration that had been building for months, like we're all just waiting for someone else to solve our problems. Tom chuckled, but there was wisdom in his pale blue eyes. "You sound like someone with fight in them. That can be dangerous in a place like this." Before Jake could respond, a distant rumble echoed across the desert, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Both men turned toward the horizon, where a cloud of dust grew larger by the second. Tom's expression darkened instantly. "Get inside, Jake, now." "What? Why?" "That's more than one rider coming hard. In my experience, that never means good news." The thundering grew louder until 5 riders exploded into view, their horses lathered with sweat and foam. Leading them was a tall, lean man dressed entirely in black, his long, dark hair flowing beneath a wide-brimmed hat. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, and 2 pearl-handled revolvers sat crossed on his chest. This was Venom Drake, and his reputation had arrived long before he did. The riders pulled up in a dramatic cloud of dust right in front of the sheriff's office. Venom dismounted with fluid grace, his cold eyes surveying the street like a predator evaluating prey. His men, 4 hardened criminals Jake had only heard about in whispered conversations, spread out behind him. Sheriff Harrison stumbled out of the saloon, his badge crooked and his shirt stained with whiskey. He tried to puff out his chest, but his trembling hands betrayed his fear. "Venom Drake," Harrison said, attempting authority but achieving only a quaver. "What brings you to Copper Creek?" Venom smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp. "Why, Sheriff, we're here on business. You see, this little town of yours sits on a very profitable trade route. Wagon trains, cattle drives, silver shipments, lots of valuable cargo passing through. We're offering our protection services." "Protection from what?" Harrison asked, though everyone knew the answer. "From us, of course." Venom's laugh was like breaking glass. "For just $200 a month, we guarantee nothing bad happens to your peaceful little community. Think of it as insurance." Jake watched from the stable doorway, his blood boiling as townspeople emerged from shops and homes, their faces filled with the same resigned fear he'd seen too many times. Sarah Collins stepped out of her father's general store, her blue eyes flashing with defiance, even as her father tried to pull her back inside. "And if we refuse?" Sheriff Harrison asked, though his voice suggested he was already considering acceptance. Snake Collins, Venom's right-hand man, spat into the dust. His muscular frame rippled beneath a leather vest studded with silver, and the serpent tattoo on his arm seemed to writhe in the harsh sunlight. "Boss, want me to show them what refusal looks like?" Now, Snake. These are civilized folks. I'm sure they'll see reason." Venom's eyes fixed on Sheriff Harrison. "What do you say, lawman? Do we have a deal?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. Jake could hear his own heartbeat as he watched the sheriff, the man sworn to protect this town, consider surrendering to criminals. Finally, Harrison's shoulders sagged. We need time to raise the money. The town council has 1 week," Venom finished. "We'll be camped just outside town. Don't keep us waiting, Sheriff. We're not patient men." As the gang prepared to leave, something inside Jake snapped. The years of watching corruption and cowardice, of seeing good people suffer while bad men prospered, of being dismissed as just a stable boy, it all came rushing to the surface. "This is wrong!" Jake's voice rang out across the street, causing heads to turn. He stepped out of the stable, his fists clenched. "You can't just ride into someone's town and demand money." Venom turned slowly, his cold gaze fixing on Jake like a snake spotting a mouse. "Well, well. Looks like someone has something to say. And you are?" "Jake Carter. I work at the stable." Despite the tremor in his voice, Jake stood his ground. "And I'm telling you to leave these people alone." The gang erupted in laughter. Snake doubled over, slapping his knee. "Did you hear that, boys? The horse boy wants us to leave." "That's rich," chuckled another gang member. "What are you going to do about it, kid? Throw horseshoes at us?" But Venom wasn't laughing. He studied Jake with predatory interest, as if seeing something others missed. "You've got spirit, boy. I'll give you that. But spirit without skill just gets you dead. You know how to use a gun?" Jake's hand instinctively moved toward where his father's Colt would be, if he were wearing it. "I can handle myself." This brought fresh peals of laughter from the gang. Even Sheriff Harrison was chuckling now, eager to deflect attention from his own cowardice. "The stable boy thinks he's a gunfighter," Harrison wheezed. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all week." But Jake's next words silenced everyone. "I can outdraw any man in this street." The laughter died instantly. Venom's eyes narrowed, and even his men looked surprised by the bold claim. Sheriff Harrison's face turned purple with mirth and disbelief. "Any man?" Venom asked softly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "Any man?" Jake repeated, his jaw set firm despite the way his heart hammered against his ribs. Sheriff Harrison exploded into guffaws. "Oh, this is priceless. The horse boy who can barely afford bullets thinks he can outdraw professional killers." He turned to the gathering crowd. "You hear this, folks? Our stable hand here reckons he's faster than Venom Drake himself." The crowd murmured uncertainly. Some looked at Jake with pity, others with worry. But Sarah Collins stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "Maybe you should listen to him instead of laughing," she said firmly. "Sarah, get back inside," her father hissed, but she ignored him. Old Tom had emerged from the stable, his weathered face grave. He'd seen something in Jake's eyes that others missed, the same look he'd worn himself 40 years ago when he was young and fast and angry at injustice. Venom dismounted again, his movements deliberate and threatening. "Boy, do you have any idea who you're talking to? I've killed 16 men in fair fights, 16 men who thought they were fast." "17 now, boss," Snake called out, earning chuckles from the gang. But Jake didn't back down. "I don't care who you are or how many men you've killed. You're not welcome here, and someone needs to tell you that." Venom's scarred face split into a cold smile. "Well then, it seems we have ourselves a genuine challenge." He glanced around at the crowd. "Tell you what, stable boy, you want to prove yourself. Meet me at sunset, right here in the middle of the street. You can try to outdraw me personally. When you lose, and you will lose, this town pays double, 400 a month. "And when I win?" Jake asked, surprised by his own boldness. "When you win," Venom laughed, "we'll ride out and never come back. But you won't win, boy. Men like you don't win against men like me." As the gang mounted up and rode toward the edge of town, the crowd dispersed quickly, unwilling to be associated with Jake's rash challenge. Sheriff Harrison shook his head in disgust. "Damn fool boy's going to get himself killed, and cost us all extra money in the bargain," he muttered before stumbling back toward the saloon. Soon, only Jake, Old Tom, and Sarah remained in the dusty street. The weight of what he'd done was beginning to settle on Jake's shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Jake," Sarah said softly, approaching him, "that was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the most foolish." "Probably both," Tom said grimly. "Boy, do you even know what you just signed up for?" Jake looked at his calloused hands. thinking of the countless hours he'd spent in secret behind the stable, drawing and firing his father's old colt until the motion became as natural as breathing. I know I can't stand by and watch good people get hurt by men like that. Noble sentiment, Tom said, but Venom Drake has killed 16 men in gunfights. 16 men who probably thought they were doing the right thing too. Then help me, Jake said suddenly, turning to face the old man. I've seen the way you move, Tom. I've heard the stories. You weren't always a stable owner. Tom's eyes clouded with memories. That was a long time ago, boy. Different life, different man. But you still remember, and you know I've been practicing. You've seen me with my father's gun. Sarah looked between them, understanding dawning in her blue eyes. You've been training him? Not training, Tom said slowly, just watching. The boy's got natural talent, I'll give him that. Reflexes like I've never seen, but talent and training aren't the same as surviving a real gunfight. Then teach me what I need to know, Jake pleaded. I've got until sunset. That's 6 hours. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he sighed deeply. Your father would skin me alive if he knew I was letting you do this. My father's dead, Tom. Has been for 7 years, and if he were alive, he'd be standing right here next to me. Something in Jake's voice, a mature determination that hadn't been there that morning, made Tom's decision for him. All right, boy, 6 hours, but we do this my way, and you listen to every word I say. Your life depends on it. As they walked toward the stable, Sarah caught Jake's arm. Why are you doing this, really? Jake paused, looking at this girl he'd admired from afar for years, but never had the courage to approach. Because someone has to. Because if we don't stand up to men like that, who will? And because maybe it's time I stopped being afraid of who I might be. Behind the stable, away from prying eyes, old Tom revealed a side of himself that Jake had only glimpsed in fleeting moments. The limp seemed less pronounced as Tom moved with surprising grace, his weathered hands steady as he demonstrated proper stance, grip, and draw technique. First lesson, Tom said, his voice taking on the authority of a veteran. Forget everything you think you know about gunfighting from dime novels and saloon stories. A real fight ain't about being the fastest. It's about being accurate and staying alive. Speed without precision just gets you killed faster. They practiced for hours as the sun climbed toward its peak, then began its slow descent toward the western mountains. Jake's draw became smoother, more natural, but Tom wasn't satisfied. You're still thinking too much, Tom observed. In a real fight, there's no time to think. It has to be instinct, muscle memory, as natural as breathing. As sunset approached, word had spread throughout Copper Creek. People emerged from their homes and businesses, lining the main street despite the danger. Some came to support Jake, others to witness what they expected to be his execution. Jake emerged from the stable as the sun touched the western horizon, his father's colt now hanging openly at his side. Sarah stood on the porch of her father's store, her hands clasped tightly as she watched him walk toward the center of the street. Even in the dying light, she could see the change in him. The uncertain boy had been replaced by a young man with steel in his spine. Old Tom walked beside Jake, his weathered face grave but proud. As they approached the middle of the street, he placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Remember what I taught you. Don't think, just react. And whatever happens, you've already won something important. You stood up when others wouldn't. Your father would be proud. Jake nodded, his throat too tight for words. He could see Venom Drake approaching from the other end of the street, his black clothing making him look like death itself in the fading light. Venom dismounted about 50 feet away, his cold eyes studying Jake with predatory interest. When he spoke, his voice carried easily in the evening air. Well, well, the stable boy actually showed up. I'll give you credit for that. Takes guts to face your own death. Let's get this over with, Jake replied, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. Venom's smile was like winter ice. "Eager to die, are we? I can accommodate that." He settled into his stance with professional precision. "On my count of 3, boy. And don't worry, I'll make it quick." Jake felt time slow, his awareness becoming razor-sharp. He could hear his heartbeat, could smell the dust and leather and fear. In his peripheral vision, he saw Sarah's worried face, old Tom's encouraging nod. "One!" Venom called out. The street had gone completely silent, except for the whisper of desert wind. Jake remembered Tom's words. "Don't think, just react." 2! Everything seemed preternaturally clear, as if the world had become a painting, with every detail sharp and bright. Jake felt a strange calm settle over him. Win or lose, he had already accomplished something important. He had stood up when it mattered. 3! Both men moved simultaneously, their hands flashing toward their weapons with practiced precision. But something extraordinary happened. Jake's draw was not just fast, it was impossibly, supernaturally quick. His father's Colt seemed to leap into his hand of its own accord. The motion so smooth it looked effortless. Venom was fast, faster than most men would ever be. But Jake was faster. His gun cleared leather and fired while Venom's weapon was still rising. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined space of the main street. Venom stood for a moment, looking down at his chest in amazement. A spreading stain darkened his black shirt, and his legs gave way. He collapsed to his knees, then pitched forward into the dust. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Venom's men shifted nervously, their hands moving toward their weapons, but the fight had gone out of them with their leader's death. "We'll be riding out now," one of them said quietly. "Won't be any more trouble from us." Jake nodded, still holding his smoking gun. "See that there isn't." As the surviving outlaws mounted their horses and rode into the gathering darkness, the crowd erupted into cheers. People who had been ready to write Jake off as a foolish boy now pressed forward to shake his hand, to clap him on the back, to offer their congratulations and thanks. Sheriff Harrison pushed through the crowd, his face a mixture of embarrassment and grudging respect. "Well, I'll be jiggered," he said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology, son. And more than that, I owe you my job. Hell, we all do." But Jake barely heard the praise. The reality of what he'd done, what he'd become, was settling over him like a heavy blanket. He had killed a man tonight, ended a life with his father's gun and his own skill. The fact that Venom Drake was evil didn't make the weight any easier to bear. Old Tom appeared at his elbow, his weathered hand gripping Jake's shoulder firmly. "Come on, boy. You need to sit down, get something to drink. First gunfight hits everyone hard." As they walked toward the stable, Sarah Collins broke free from the crowd and ran to Jake's side. Without a word, she took his free hand in both of hers, her blue eyes bright with tears of relief and pride. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Jake managed a tired smile. "Wasn't sure I could." "I was," she said firmly. "I believed in you from the beginning." They reached the stable as the crowd began to disperse, people returning to their homes with a new sense of security. The immediate danger was over, but Jake knew his life had changed irrevocably. Word would spread. It always did in situations like this. By morning, every settlement within 100 miles would know about the stable boy who could outdraw any man. "What happens now?" Jake asked as they settled on hay bales in the stable's main aisle. "Now you decide who you want to be," Tom replied. "You've got a choice to make, Jake. You can go back to caring for horses and pretend this never happened, or you can accept what you've become." "And what's that?" "A protector. Whether you like it or not, that's what you are now. The question is what you'll do with it." Sarah squeezed Jake's hand. "You'll do the right thing. You'll help people. Protect them from men like Venom Drake." "It's not that simple," Tom said gently. "Jake's got a reputation now. Every fast gun in the territory will want to try him, to see if the stories are true. Some will be looking for fame, others for revenge. Jake nodded slowly, understanding the truth of it. "So what do I do?" "You survive," Tom said simply. "You stay alive. You help people when you can, and you try not to become the thing you fought against tonight." 6 months later, Jake Carter wore a sheriff's star and carried his father's Colt openly on his hip. Sheriff Harrison had retired. Some said he'd been encouraged to do so by concerned citizens, and Jake had been unanimously elected to take his place. At 20, he was the youngest sheriff in Arizona Territory, but no one questioned his qualifications after the night he faced down Venom Drake. The town of Copper Creek had changed too. Word of Jake's victory had spread, bringing honest settlers and legitimate businesses to what was now known as the safest town between Phoenix and Tucson. The main street bustled with activity. New buildings went up every month, and the sound of hammers and saws filled the air. Jake stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, watching the controlled chaos of a thriving community. Sarah emerged from the general store, now expanded and renamed Collins and Carter Mercantile, carrying a ledger book and wearing the small diamond ring Jake had given her the month before. "The afternoon stage is due in 20 minutes, she said, settling beside him on the bench they'd placed outside the office. "Tom says there might be passengers looking to settle here permanently." Jake nodded, his hand unconsciously checking his gun. The habit had become second nature, a necessary caution for a man with his reputation. In the past 6 months, he'd faced 3 challenges from aspiring gunfighters, all of which he'd won without taking a life. Word was spreading that Sheriff Carter preferred to wound rather than kill when possible, a mercy that had only added to his legend. "Any word from the territorial marshal?" Sarah asked. "Got a telegram this morning. They're officially recognizing Copper Creek as a county seat, which means we'll get funding for a proper jail and courthouse. They're also offering me a commission as a federal marshal if I want it." Sarah looked at him with interest. "Do you?" Jake was quiet for a moment, watching a family of settlers unload their wagon in front of the hotel. "Part of me does. There's a lot of country out there that needs cleaning up, a lot of towns like Copper Creek used to be. But another part of me thinks maybe I've done enough fighting for one lifetime. You're 20 years old, Jake Carter. You've barely started your lifetime." He smiled at that. "Sometimes I feel older than Tom. That's what happens when you grow up fast. But you don't have to carry the weight of the whole world, you know. Other people can fight their own fights." "Can they?" "Look around, Sarah. 6 months ago, this street was empty by sundown because people were afraid. Now kids play out here until their mothers call them in for supper. That didn't happen by accident. No, it happened because one stable boy decided he'd had enough of being afraid. But that stable boy is gone, Jake. You're the sheriff now, and this town is safe. Maybe it's time to think about what comes next." As Jake considered her words, the afternoon stage rumbled into view, right on schedule. Among the passengers who disembarked was a familiar face, a territorial marshal Jake recognized from wanted posters and newspaper articles. The man approached with purpose, his badge glinting in the afternoon sun. "Sheriff Carter, I'm Marshal William Hayes. I believe you received our telegram about the federal marshal position." Jake stood, extending his hand. "Marshal Hayes, pleasure to meet you. The pleasure's mine, son. Your reputation precedes you. We need men like you, men who can make us stand when it matters. The territory's growing fast, but law and order aren't keeping pace. Towns all across Arizona and New Mexico are facing the same problems Copper Creek had 6 months ago." Sarah watched the exchange with growing concern, sensing that their peaceful life was about to be disrupted once again. "What exactly are you offering?" Jake asked. "A chance to make a real difference. We're forming a special task force of federal marshals to deal with the worst outlaw gangs operating in the Southwest. Good pay, federal backing, and the authority to bring law to places that have never known it." Jake looked around at the thriving town. at the people who depended on him, at Sarah, whose face showed her fear of losing him to this larger calling. "I appreciate the offer, Marshal, but I've got responsibilities here." Hayes nodded understandingly. "I expected you'd say that. It's what makes you the right man for the job. But think about it, Carter. You can protect one town, or you can help protect an entire territory. The choice is yours, but I'll need an answer within the week." As the Marshal departed with the evening stage, Jake found himself facing the biggest decision of his young life. Sarah took his hand, her grip tight with worry. "You're going to take it, aren't you?" she asked quietly. Jake was silent for a long moment, watching the sun set over the peaceful town they'd built together. "I don't know. Part of me wants to stay here, marry you, raise a family, live a quiet life. But another part keeps thinking about all the towns out there that don't have anyone willing to stand up to men like Venom Drake. And what about us? What about our future?" "Come with me," Jake said suddenly, turning to face her. "Marry me, Sarah. We'll travel together, bring law and order to the frontier. It won't be easy, but we'll be together." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, whether of joy or sorrow, Jake couldn't tell. "You're asking me to give up everything I know, everything I've built here. I'm asking you to help me build something bigger, something that matters." She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the town that had become her home. Finally, she squeezed his hand and smiled through her tears. "When do we leave?" 3 days later, Jake Carter and Sarah Collins were married in the small church at the center of Copper Creek. Old Tom stood as Jake's best man, tears streaming down his weathered face as he watched the boy he'd trained become a man with a mission. After the ceremony, as the newlyweds prepared to leave with Marshal Hayes, Tom pulled Jake aside for a final word. "Your father would be proud," the old man said simply. "You've become the kind of man this country needs." "I learned from the best," Jake replied, embracing the man who had been more than a mentor, who had been the father he'd lost. As their wagon pulled away from Copper Creek, Jake and Sarah looked back at the town that had made them who they were. It was thriving now, safe and prosperous, protected by the deputy Jake had trained and the reputation he'd built. But ahead lay new challenges, new towns in need of protection, new opportunities to prove that sometimes the most unlikely heroes could make the greatest difference. Jake, Lightning Carter, had proven he could outdraw any man. Now it was time to prove he could be something more, a symbol of hope in a lawless land, a guardian of justice on the endless frontier. The stable boy who had made his stand in the dusty street of a forgotten Arizona town was gone. In his place rode a federal marshal and his brave wife, carrying the law to places where it had never existed, bringing hope to people who had given up believing in heroes. And somewhere behind them, carried on the desert wind, echoed the words that had started it all. "I can outdraw any man." It had been more than a boast. It had been a promise kept.